Hello YouTube, welcome to FSX Genius and to the second tutorial in the flight school. The first tutorial we took a Cessna 172. We looked at some of the basics in that aircraft, so we looked at how to set trim for climbs and level flight and descents. We also looked at how to make basic turns and how to make an approach to an airport runway by overflying the airport and then making a series of turns to come back in and line up with the runway. We also looked at something called an NDB, a non-directional beacon, and it's a very simple form of navigation. An NDB simply is a beacon that's on the ground, transmits a radio signal, and you've got a needle in the aircraft that will point in the relevant direction when you're tuned to the right frequency. In this tutorial we're going to take that a step further and we're going to introduce the next level of instrument navigation, and that's the VOR, the Variable Omni-Range Beacon. Now a VOR is different to an NDB. An NDB just tells you where it is and you point the needle and you follow that needle and you'll get there eventually, but you've got to keep your eyes open. With a VOR there's a lot more information contained within the radio signal that's been sent from the ground base station. One piece of information is something called a DME, which is the distance measuring equipment frequency, and as you're flying towards this VOR or away from the VOR, it will tell you how many nautical miles you've got to go to get there or how many miles you've travelled beyond it, and that's displayed in the aircraft. So we've got distance measuring equipment included within a VOR. We've also got detailed information about the heading that we're approaching it from, or something called a radial. So if we were approaching from the left flying perfectly east, we would be on a radial of 90 degrees to the VOR, and that information, using the omni-bearing selectors, which we're going to go into some detail, using those we can actually approach these things or fly away from them on specific headings. So without further ado, let's open up the Flight Sim Commander because we're going to plan a flight using NDBs and VORs. So we're opened up here on a map of England, and if we go to the side here you can see that at the moment we've only got the airports and the NDBs highlighted, so you can see individual airports and you can see their relevant non-directional beacons highlighted in green, and it gives you the frequency for those. We want to bring up VORs as well, which is VOR is the second one down on your list at the left here, and you can see now it's added some of these orange indicators. Now these orange ones are the just move this around a little bit. These orange ones are your VORs, so we've now got NDBs and VORs, and between them we can pick and choose these and actually fly to wherever we want to in the country. So today we're going to take off from Wallasey in Barrow. Okay, Wallasey is over in the west coast of the country, just further on from Liverpool, and we're going to take off from here and we're going to fly to, well, we're going to fly over the Manchester VOR, which is here. Then when we get to the Manchester VOR we're going to fly down to the Trent VOR, and then from the Trent VOR we're going to fly to East Midlands Airport, which is EGNX. You can see East Midlands strangely has got two NDBs, and we'll look at those when we get a little bit closer to there, because we're going to choose one of these to follow in order to make our approach to the runway. They're offset from the ends of the runway, they're not directly in the middle. So that's going to be our flight plan. So we need to write down first of all the Manchester VOR frequency, which is 113.55, and we need to write down the Trent VOR frequency, which is 115.70, and we'll come back to this map in a little while because you'll notice there's no VOR actually at East Midlands Airport. So we're now on runway 35 at Wallasey. You may be on a different runway, but it doesn't matter because we're going to take off and fly to the first VOR at Manchester, and how you get there is pretty much the same. Now if we go and have a look at the radio stack here, now if you remember from the last tutorial you'll see this is the NDB direction indicator, and we put the frequency for that in here in the ADF automatic direction finder radio. Well, we're not going to use that today, or at least we're not going to use it for now. We're using VORs, and VORs we use these two instruments here. We're going to forget about this one for the moment. We're going to use this when we get closer to our landing airport at East Midlands. We're going to use this one to begin with. Now, this one is controlled by the frequency in your nav2 radio, which is here, and this one is controlled by the frequency in your nav1 radio, which is here. Now, Manchester's VOR frequency is 113.55, so we set that into the standby radio on the right, 113. Decimal 55, and we can press on the standby button to take it from standby into the active frequency, and keep an eye on this needle here. We see that nothing's happened at the moment, and that is because we're on the ground. Let's put it into the top frequency as well. And again, you can see these checker plates here. These are indicating that it can't pick the frequency up just yet. So what we're going to do is take off. Now, we know from looking at our map originally that we need to be flying generally easterly to get towards that Manchester VOR. So we're going to take off and we're going to turn to the east. And we're going to climb to a flight level of 5,000 feet. So we need to prepare the aircraft for doing that. First of all, in our automatic pilot, we're going to set our altitude here at 5,000 feet. However, we're not going to, as usual, not going to engage that until we get close to that altitude. We'll set our lights as well. So we want landing lights on, nav lights and strobe lights on. And we need to set our trim to take off. Now you can hold down your trim button. As you can see, I'm not doing anything with the mouse, I'm just moving my trim button. And we've set it to take off trim. And I suppose the final thing to do now would be to set wing flaps to their first stage. So let's just press F7 on your keyboard once. And that's done. So we're ready for takeoff, and we're not using any air traffic control today. We're just going to fly this manually. So as before, we're going to accelerate down the runway. When we get to about 60 knots, we're going to start pulling back. That's our rotate speed, and start to gently climb. We're going to keep an eye on the speed, which is here. And we're going to trim our aircraft so that we stay constantly at 90 knots with full power on, which will give us a 90 knot climb speed, and we use the trim to make sure we maintain 90 knots. So let's get into the air first of all. Just using slight rudder inputs to keep the aircraft centred on the runway. Okay, passing 60 knots, we're going to gently pull back and begin our climb. Flaps up. Just keeping my trim in check, just so the speed will continue to increase to about 90 knots. Remember, as you bring the flaps up, the aircraft trim will change.